Hello everybody, welcome again to Storytime from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes from a small tribe called the Drung tribe in the Yunnan Province of China. And this is a story about a young boy and how he managed to change his world. This is the tale of White Tiger, Blue Serpent. A long time ago, in a remote area of China, there was a big river that ran rushing down, and it divided the land into two sides. Now, on the east side of the river, the land was beautiful. The grass was green and lush. The trees grew tall. They had exotic fruit hanging off of them. In the magical mountains there were beautiful lakes, and many animals roamed about and cried out on that land. But as beautiful as it was, no one from the west bank of the river dared to go there. There was a big bridge that crossed the raging river, but no one dared to cross it. For you see, the east side of the river was the land of the goddess Qin, and the goddess Qin was jealous, and she had a temper, and so no one dared to go there. The west bank of the river looked very, very different. It was rocky and barren, and nothing really grew there. There were trees, but they were dark, and the forests were empty. There were no animals in them at all. Well, on this unlucky side of the river was a tiny cottage, standing all by itself on the shore. And in that cottage, there lived a young boy named Kai and his mother. Now, Kai and his mother were very poor, and they had to work very hard every single day. Kai's job was to fish. He would go down to the raging river and he would throw his fishing line in, and he had to catch some fish for them to have for supper. Kai's mother had a beautiful skill. She could make the most beautiful brocades. She would sit and she would weave the beautiful silk fabrics in all sorts of colors. And she was so good at it, as she would sit there weaving beautiful flowers and elegant birds, and curious looking fish would come to life in the delicate threads of her brocades. And each brocade took many, many months to finish. And when it was done, they would take it to the village and they would sell it, so that they could have rice and firewood and more silk to make another weaving. Now, the problem was, for Kai, who had to sit by the river and fish, the river ran so fast that the fish were tumbled down out of the mountains, and frequently they did not even see Kai's line. They were moving too fast. And so it usually took him all day just to catch enough fish to last them for the day, to have some for dinner. And Kai's mother, as she was weaving the beautiful brocades, Kai would come home and he would look at the brocades, and they were so glorious and so beautiful, he didn't want to part with them. For you see, he really wanted to have one that they could keep, but they needed to sell it so they would have rice to eat and firewood to keep them warm and more silk to weave another brocade with. And so Kai would always beg his mother, "Please, mother, please, can't we keep this one just to enjoy it for ourselves? They're so beautiful. I'll catch more fish, and maybe if I catch more, then we'll have some left over that we can trade for more silk. And I'll get the firewood from the forest myself, and we won't have to buy it in the market. And maybe I could even plant some rice, and then we wouldn't have to buy the rice, and we wouldn't have to trade another brocade." Well, every time Kai's mother made a brocade, Kai would give those arguments. And the thing is, Kai's mother really did want to make a brocade for her son. he worked so hard at the fishing and doing all of the other things to help around the house, and she really did want to make him a brocade, but they needed the food and the firewood that the brocades would bring. And all of the work that he was saying he was going to do was not the kind of work that you wanted a young lad to be doing. It was work for a grown man. And Kai's mother kept telling him no, and then he would have to take the brocade to the market and trade it for rice and for firewood and for more weaving silk. But finally one day, Kai's mother decided that she was indeed going to make a brocade for her son. She really wanted to, and he really wanted one. And so, when Kai's mother completed her brocade that she was working on, Kai took it to the market. But he only bought half of the rice that he would normally have bought. And he only bought weaving silk. He did not buy any firewood. And he went with the money that was left over, and he went and he bought a small axe and some rice seedlings, and then he went home. The next morning, Kai and his mother got up earlier than they normally did, and they normally got up quite early indeed. And when they got up, Kai's mother sat down at the loom and she began to weave the new brocade. And Kai went down to the shore, and he threw his line in and he began to fish. But even though he had gotten up so very early, it still took until nearly midday for him to catch a fish for their supper. But Kai didn't stop, and he didn't get discouraged. He just took that fish straight home with him, and then he picked up the little axe he had bought, and he went out to the forest, and he started chopping firewood. But the axe was rather heavy to his young arms. He wasn't used to using it. And it took him until it got dark to chop enough firewood to last them for the next few days. And then Kai went home, and he and his mother cooked the fish, and they had their supper. And then Kai took a lantern, and by lantern light he went out, and he plowed a field, and he flooded it, and he planted the rice seedlings. And every day, Kai would get up very early and go down to the river and fish, and then go out to the forest and cut firewood, and come back and tend to his rice field. Now, in the beginning, it was very, very hard work. But as time went by, Kai began to change. In the beginning, he had needed to take a fishing rod with him, and he would throw the line out into the river, and he would pull it back, and he would throw it out, and he would pull it back until he would catch a fish. But as time went by, it took him less and less time to catch the fish, for you see, he got so used to staring at the fast-moving water that he could see the fish coming as they would come, and he could throw his line out to where they were coming, and then he would catch fish faster. And eventually, he got quick enough that he could see the fish coming, and it was come close to the bank, he would just reach in and grab it and pull it out of the water. And in the beginning, when he would go out to the forest to cut the firewood, it would take him so long, and the axe was so heavy. But after a while, the axe didn't feel as heavy, and it didn't take him quite as long. In fact, after a while, the axe became lighter and lighter and lighter, and before too long, Kai was so strong that he didn't need the axe anymore. He could just pull a tree up by its roots and bring it home and break it in half and use it as firewood. And in the beginning, when Kai went out to plant his rice and tend his field, he had to take a lantern with him because it was so dark at night. But he found that over time, he needed the lantern less and less. And eventually, his eyes grew so used to seeing in the dark that they could see even the tiniest grain of rice, no matter how dark the night. His eyesight was so sharp. And all the while that Kai was changing like this, his mother continued to weave the beautiful brocade. It took her 1,000 days and 1,000 1,000 nights. But the brocade was beautiful. The most elegant birds and the most curious fish and the most beautiful animals and flowers that you have ever seen were growing on the brocade. Well, as the 1,000 days and nights drew to a close, Kai and his mother were getting very excited to see the finished brocade, and so were the people of the village, for you see, they had heard about this wonderful brocade that was more beautiful than anything Kai's mother had ever made, and she made some very beautiful cloth. And so, when the 1,000 days and nights were over and the brocade was finished, all of the people of the village came rushing to their hut to see this beautiful brocade. There were so many people that Kai's mother could not stay inside the house, for everyone wanted to see, and their house was just too small. And so she brought the brocade out of the house, and she laid it out on the ground so that everyone could see the beautiful brocade. The colors were they jumped off of the cloth, and the animals looked as though they could run away in an instant, and the birds looked as though they would fly up in the air, and the fish to leap out of the water. It was the most beautiful brocade anyone had ever seen. But before a single person could say anything in praise of the beautiful brocade, suddenly a wind came out of nowhere. It swirled around the house, and it picked up the brocade, and it lifted it up into the air, and it flew off with it across the bridge and up into the magical mountains on the east side of the river. Oh, all of the villagers were horrified. Oh no, it is the goddess Qin! They were so scared they all ran back and hid in their houses. But Kai was very upset. His mother had spent 1,000 days and 1,000 nights on that brocade, and he had worked so hard in the field and in fishing and gathering wood. He was not about to let that brocade go. And so Kai jumped up, and as everyone else ran off to their homes, he ran off after the brocade, across the bridge and up into the mountains. Well, the brocade was soon very high up in the air, and to most people it would have been completely out of sight. But Kai's eyesight had become so sharp from tending his rice field in the dark that he could still see it. And so he continued to follow it, up over mountains and down into valleys, and finally the brocade flew up and into a dark forest and disappeared. And so Kai went running into the forest, chasing that brocade, and suddenly he skidded to a halt. For there was the brocade lying in the middle of the clearing, and sitting on top of it was the largest white tiger Kai had ever seen. Now Kai knew that the goddess Qin was guarded in her kingdom by a white tiger and a blue serpent. And so he knew that this must be the goddess's white tiger. And indeed, it was bigger than any tiger he had ever seen, for he had seen some on the other side of the river sometimes. It was huge. Its claws were long and sharp, and its teeth were long and sharp too, and it was a very frightening sight. But Kai wanted his brocade back. And so when the tiger bared its teeth and growled at him, Kai did not run away. Instead, he took 2 steps towards the tiger, and then the tiger arched his back and began to run towards Kai. Well, Kai was frightened, of course, but he knew that he had to defend himself somehow. And so he looked around, and there he saw a tree. And as you know, Kai was strong enough to pull trees out of the ground, and so he just reached over and he picked up that tree. And when the tiger got close enough, you know what Kai did? He took that tree and he just swung it at the tiger, and he hit the tiger so hard that the tiger went flying through the air and landed on the ground, unconscious. Kai had knocked him out. And so Kai dropped the tree and he ran up, and just as his fingers were about to touch the silken threads of the brocade, it swept up in the air again on the wind, and it flew off across the forest. Well, Kai followed it, running all day and all night. And as he ran and he ran and he ran, he came to the edge of a lake, and he could see the brocade was flying across the lake towards an island in the middle. And so Kai looked about him, and he saw an old rowboat just there, and so he pushed the rowboat into the water, and he began to row. But the odd thing was, he was rowing and rowing and rowing, but he didn't seem to be going anywhere. The shore wasn't getting any further away, and the island wasn't getting any closer. And so Kai looked down into the water, and he realized that if this was water that he was sitting in, a lake he was sitting in, then it was a lake of blue scales. For indeed, the blue serpent was underneath the rowboat, and it wasn't letting Kai go anywhere. And then just as he realized that, the head of the serpent came up out of the water, and it had long fangs and fiery breath. And Kai was a little bit frightened. And then the serpent ducked its head, for it had a big horn on its head. It ducked its head and it pointed its horn straight at Kai to run him through. But Kai had become very quick from catching all of those fish in the river. And so very quickly, before the serpent could run him through, he grabbed a hold of the serpent's horn. And when the serpent swung his head around to try to get Kai off, Kai just wrapped his arms around the horn and he just held on. And the serpent thrashed and rolled and tried to shake Kai off of his horn so that he could get at him and bite him in half. But Kai was being very smart. He paid attention as the serpent thrashed his head around, and at just the right moment, he let go of the serpent's horn, and the very motion of the serpent and the power of the serpent flinging his head about threw Kai up in the air, and he landed on the island that he had been trying to get to. So then Kai began to run up the hill, up towards the mountain that was in the middle of the island, following the direction he had seen the brocade go. And when he got up to the top of the mountain, he found a great big castle there, a magnificent castle covered in jewels and crystals and all sorts of beautiful things. Well, Kai stopped for a minute, and then he kept running. He wanted that brocade back. He ran up to the door, and just as he was about to pound on the door, it silently swung open. And there was a beautiful handmaiden standing there, and she beckoned him to come inside, and he did. And she touched the gate with her hands, and they slammed shut. And then she beckoned for Kai to follow her, and she began to walk through the palace, through magnificent rooms covered with beautiful tapestries and the thickest carpets on the floor, beautiful mosaics on the wall of colored stones and gems and crystals and all sorts of things, fountains leaping, the most beautiful place Kai had ever seen. But he still wanted his brocade back. Finally, the maiden led him into the most magnificent room of all. And in the center of the room was a circle of beautiful women sitting on the ground, surrounding the most beautiful woman that Kai had ever seen. And in her lap lay the beautiful brocade, and she was stroking it just a little. This, Kai thought, must be the goddess Qin. And the goddess looked at him, and she said, "Oh, Kai, you have had a long journey for nothing, for this is the most magnificent brocade I have ever seen. I've never seen anything so glorious, and I intend to keep it for myself." Well, Kai was a little afraid of the goddess Qin, but he wanted his brocade back. She couldn't just take it without asking. And so he started forward to take it back. But when he did, a great wind began to blow in the room. And even though he fought with all of his strength, the wind began to swirl and whirl, and Kai could not get through. Before too long, it was a mighty strong whirlwind. It blew all of the handmaids up against the walls. The goddess Chin was sitting in the middle of it with the brocade in her lap, and Kai was fighting with everything he had to get through the wind. And he was getting more and more tired, for he had been traveling for quite some time. And just as he was beginning to think that he would not be able to survive this whirlwind much longer, something truly miraculous happened. Suddenly, the whirlwind, it seemed, had gotten so strong that suddenly all of the creatures of the brocade were blown right off of it. Birds took flight, deer leapt off, bears lumbered forth, peacocks screamed, trees and flowers flew up into the air and were swirling round the whirlwind, and the rainbow that had been on the cloth lifted itself up and spread itself out in a great long bridge, up, over the walls of the castle, over the great dark lake, over all of the mountains and forest, and down onto the shore on the west side of the river, right in front of Kai's little cottage. And so Kai jumped up and he ran off down that rainbow, and all of the animals and the birds and the flowers and the trees followed him, leaving the goddess Chin sitting in her room with nothing but a faded cloth full of holes in her lap. Kai and all of the animals and all of the birds and all of the flowers and all of the things from the beautiful brocade slid down that rainbow all the way down and landed right in front of the cottage. Kai's mother came running out to greet her son and welcome him home, and then she began to laugh. For all of the fish from the brocade jumped into the river, and suddenly there were plenty of fish. One did not have to fish for hours to catch food. And all of the animals and the birds and the insects scampered away to find new homes all over the western side of the river. The flowers landed on the ground and popped up as though they had been there forever. The trees planted themselves all over, and the sun gently smiled on the whole scene. And from that day forward, the east side of the river and the west side of the river stood balanced in their brilliance and their splendor, and Kai and his mother lived peacefully and happily in the beauty of the magnificent brocade. And that is the story of White Tiger, Blue Serpent from the Drung tribe of the Yunnan Province of China. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back and join us again on Friday. At 3 p.m. Central Time, we will have another story for you here from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.